workers of this country will not allow them to restructure our economy so that it gives more power to the white bosses. We are saying the wealth of South Africa belongs to all its people, and it is the workers who produce that wealth of South Africa.
South Africa's income distribution is possibly the very worst in the world.
At the present moment, few people are able to afford to buy.
Many black children are actually facing starvation. Malnutrition is the highest amongst blacks.
Throughout the country, Operation Hunger is feeding 1.8 million people.
South Africa has the most powerful economy on the African continent. It produces a vast array of minerals, manufactured goods and agricultural products. The South African economy has over the past 10 years lapsed into a deep recession despite its enormous potential to develop. The virtual lack of growth points to an economic system with major structural flaws. These stem directly from the apartheid system within which every aspect of the economy was planned. As a result, one of the most striking features of the economy is the massive inequality which exists between a small class of wealthy whites and the black working class population, without which this economic giant could not have been built. The effects of bad economic policy impact most heavily on the working classes.
You can go into a shop and buy for 40 rand only the basic stuff. Like I did this morning, maybe a little bit more meat you buy for a Sunday. And in 2 years, I can tell you, the stuff I bought this morning went up, say, 3 times within 2 years. So if one in turn look to the wage increases you get for the 2 years, and if you look to all the things you have to pay, I would say that it is a hard story to keep your head just over the water, to have the basic food in your cupboard.
Workers in general, for black workers in particular, are living in townships without the basic facilities. The schooling is extremely expensive and poor, so the wage levels are largely static. Now, when you add inflation to that, your standard of living is very severely affected.
Unemployment in South Africa has risen rapidly over the past few years. It now stands at approximately 5 million people, and the numbers continue to grow.
My name is Leo Mbele. I live in Everton. I've got 2 kids with my wife. Since I was not working, I was walking around looking for a job, and then they told me that there's no job, see, because so many companies make retrenchments, even now. So I can't force them to employ me, you see. In my life, as I've got kids, they mustn't suffer. I don't want to be rich and then to look some other people, they are down, you see. I just want to get a business, a small one, and then to feed my children, and then get a house and get my place, and then I think I'll be pleased.
South Africa is in what is more clearly a crisis, and that is that there are serious obstacles to the economy reviving.
Unquestionably, it was sanctions. I mean, sanctions has been an absolute killer. I mean, it's brought apartheid to its knees.
The principal reason is the apartheid system. It's produced an economy that is structurally wrong.
The policies over the last few years of government has been ideologically motivated. It's been part of the grand design of apartheid. Let's take Atlantis as an example. They had a policy which said that black people must be kept out of the white cities. So what they needed to do is to create decentralized areas. They would look at the map and they just carve out a decentralized area somewhere. that they will then design a system of incentives to attract capital to set up factories in those decentralized areas.
Since 1986, there has been 14 factories that have closed down in Atlantis. I think in Atlantis the major problem was the subsidy that the government gave to these companies. Now once the subsidy stopped after 7 years, the companies just move out and leave the people unemployed. And we think it's the responsibility of the government to look into the areas of like Atlantis, which is a decentralized area.
The problem I see with Atlantis is most of the companies that is in Atlantis are smaller plants or bigger plants in town. So they get the subsidies, and then after the 8 years, they decide, I've got another plant in town who's making lots and lots of profits. Why must I stay here? And they start thinking of move, and then they move.
If you're retrenched in one factory, you must be very lucky to find a job at another factory. As I said, so many factories have closed down, and there are thousands of people walking around seeking jobs day after day, week after week.
If you go into the residential area, you will find a lot of empty houses. There's empty houses and there's people, overcrowded houses, people are on the waiting list. But the council don't put those people into houses because the people can't afford to pay their rent because they don't have jobs.
I think that the question of job creation in a way is maybe the most fundamental question that is facing a new South Africa. I mean, we have to devise ways and means of creating more jobs.
While the unions argue strongly for immediate policies of job creation, such as a state-supported public works scheme, the government normally points to the marketplace in addressing the problems of unemployment. They cite the so-called informal sector as one such example.
The government's vision seems to be, all you need to do is deregulate, remove every little regulation in the economy, and hope that through taxis and through the selling of fruit and through the selling of newspapers by the informal sector, somehow you're going to create enough jobs for the 5 million unemployed in South Africa. That's wishful thinking. That's not being very realistic.
Sometimes the business is bad, sometimes the business is good. There's not a normal standard where you can pick up a net wage.
Maak net genoeg om kos te kry. Van koring klere. Elke dag van ons brak en dan koop ons elke dag peanuts. Ons het gesondheid genoeg om kos te koop vir die huis nie. Daarom koop ons goed.
The informal sector should not be looked upon as a permanent feature of the economy, in my view. I think that it should be looked upon as a temporary feature. People don't decide to go into the informal sector. They fall into it. You just find you have no job, and then you must do something in order to live. But what should be done in that way is then to try and use this entrepreneurship, which is developing within the informal sector, and assist these people to move a step higher into some sort of a small formal business.
It is evident from the crisis in the economy that major restructuring needs to take place. While the manufacturing sector of the economy is seen to be the largest contributor to our gross domestic product, analysts point to serious problems that would have to be addressed for any real growth to occur.
Over the last 30-40 years, the National Party imposed its vision of industrial development in South Africa. Its vision was simply one way. It said, South Africa is an isolated country. It has its own politics. Its politics is very unpopular in the world. It will create an economy that's not really connected to the rest of the world. They gave it a fancy title. They called it inward industrialization. Now, inward industrialization in its early stages was very good. It helped to get textile factories, clothing factories, metal factories, chemical factories built in South Africa. But then because of apartheid policies, because of the inward nature of the government's own vision, it never sought to say, how can we make these factories as efficient, as strong as factories in other countries? So they created a very big industry, but a very weak industry.
We have had very low productivity and declining productivity of labor with quite substantial increases in wages and salaries. So the so-called labor unit cost of production in South Africa today is very high. We don't have cheap labor in this country.
We have over the last couple of years paid huge increments in comparison to the productivity achievements. Although one can argue the cost of living has gone up considerably and the increases over the last couple of years have just matched the inflation rate. But if you look at the productivity gains we have made, the productivity gains fall far behind the actual increments we are paying. And I think this is one of the critical issues which we have to come to grips with. Because the only chance for our industry and for a lot of other industries to survive is to become a global player. Now, the only way to become a global player, you must be competitive.
There's presently a debate over the issue of productivity, specifically over the way in which productivity has been measured by the private sector and state institutions and reported. And there is some evidence that indicates that productivity has actually risen in many instances where this has not been indicated in the official statistics.
When people talk about productivity in South Africa, they would compare that with countries like Germany, Sweden, and so on, not taking into consideration aspects that they have created themselves. The lack of education on workers, the lack of training, so that creates a situation where you have an unskilled workforce. The factors like low wages, communication problems, certain aspects of their problems not being addressed by management. Those are the factors that workers cannot fully cooperate with management on the question of productivity.
Not only has the apartheid education system placed black workers at a major disadvantage, not only has it meant that our literacy levels and the formal education is very low, but there's been no proper and no coherent industry training programs. You come into the textile industry or you come into the metal industry, there's no way in which that industry has put aside some capital to train you. A human being is just seen to be dispensable. They take you from the street, they teach you on the machine quickly. When there's a bit of a dip in the market, they spit you out again.
South Africa has always depended on the mining industry to carry it through hard times. But as the worldwide price of raw materials continues to decline, the mining industry itself stands at a crucial crossroad.
My name is Franz Mashangu, and I'm working in this mine. This is Douglas Colliery. 70% of the coal that we produce is for Eskom, and 30% is for export. It's an area that should have been growing, but then because of some of the things that are happening, the bureaucratic practices, so there's no growth at all. But the area itself is very rich in coal.
The situation for the mining sector seems to be quite dim. I mean, one has to only look at the prices which are being paid for primary commodities, because most of the South African manufacturing mining products have been exported almost in the raw form.
Because of our tremendous wealth of mineral resources, we've used them very extravagantly. Now, we've never bothered to what is called beneficiate those minerals. So we export the raw steel instead of producing better steel. It's starting to change, but now we've wasted those resources. We should be processing our mineral wealth into manufactured product instead of just exporting the mineral wealth.
It's important not to view the mining industry as a separate entity, but as an interlinked complex of a whole range of industries. You've had in recent years the development of a number of beneficiation industries downstream of the mining industry, and in addition to that, mining plays a very important role in underpinning the chemical sector and the energy sector. In terms of electricity, over 90% of all electricity produced comes from coal. So if one were to take out the chemicals and the mineral processing sectors from what is traditionally regarded as the manufacturing sector, you are actually left with a manufacturing sector that has not grown much since the Second World War. That most growth and investment has taken place in precisely this integrated core of mining and mineral processing and energy.
Agriculture is vital to any economy. In South Africa, the agricultural sector is beset with problems: drought, debt, low prices, low wages, and perhaps above all, unequal land distribution.
The agricultural sector employs almost 1.2 million. Another 7 million people are dependent on agricultural employment, the families of agricultural workers. This is about 15% of the people in the formal economy. Workers live on the farm. The farmer takes responsibility for their lives 24 hours a day. Not responsibility only, but control over. So I think the most important characteristic is that there's no civil society on a farm.
The farm workers are not covered by any form of legislation, and also they are suffering under the brutal treatment of the farm owners or farm management.
What must be remembered is that agriculture contributes about 5% to the GDP, while about 15 or more % of the working population is involved in agriculture. So agriculture isn't in a favorable condition to supply the same living conditions to its people than the rest of the economy, and therefore we maintain that the broader community and the government must also assist farmers with housing projects, schooling projects, developmental projects on the farms, and we believe that that was neglected in the past.
I don't think in any other African country has there been such a history of social engineering and forced removals, people moving from one area to the next, and such a de-skilling of what used to be the peasant population. At the present moment, black agricultural producers, particularly in the homelands, produce a minuscule amount for the market. And I think an indicator of success of agricultural production needn't necessarily be how much has come to market, but can be seen as part of a broader livelihood strategies in the rural areas, in improving quality of life in the rural areas. But there's enormous potential for small-scale production, or black small-scale agricultural production within what is now the white farming area, where clearly farm workers have developed skills and have taken over or in effect run and are the primary producers of agriculture in some parts of South Africa. And what we need to do is to begin a process where those farm workers get user rights or land rights around the land that they have been working on for generations often.
White farmers are facing an incredible crisis. The state won't support them anymore. They consume too much. They're known for what they call conspicuous consumption.
It's clearly incorrect to have put these billions of rand into supporting inefficient white farmers, because you are taking already produced wealth, in a sense, to pour it down a drain.
We do not believe that unviable operations must be maintained by subsidies. In present circumstances, I think it is a one-off sort of aid program that is needed. I think that in the longer run, it will be to the benefit of the whole economy that we have helped farmers in this way. But I think that farmers in the longer run must be sustainable in their own respect.
In examining the structure of the private sector in South Africa, one is immediately struck by the huge concentration of wealth in the hands of a few major conglomerates. Some economists believe that these conglomerates are the single biggest cause of inflation in South Africa.
I think it's about 80% of the industries that we have more than 75% of the production in any industry is produced by two or even one, two, or three producers. That is a sitter for cartel formation.
The concentration of economic power in the hands of a few is not good for an economic system. Having said this, however, in South Africa, for example, in the field of banking, where we have a greater responsibility and we're more involved in that, we have 4 or 5 big banks in the country and a number of smaller banks. And yet, amongst these 4 or 5 big banks, there's very severe competition. So I think, fortunately, in the case of South Africa, the few big conglomerates do operate in an environment of relatively strong competition.
You can't have massive conglomerates dominating your economy, making decisions in small boardrooms that affect half your economy. Our analysis from the Cosatu side and research that we've done argues that these conglomerates are actually inefficient for growth and need to be broken up.
If you feel that Anglo-American is living in a hothouse where it has too much of it in its own way inside South Africa, or other big companies in South Africa are living in a protected environment, the way to discipline them, the way to make sure that they deliver the best possible deal to the consumer is to open the competition of the South African economy, allow outside competition to enter the South African economy, and to discipline price determination in South Africa, and then the consumer will get a good deal.
We must examine whether conglomerates are the best form of economic activity or enterprise to promote economic growth. Can you have the best growth when the managers who make the investment decisions are not close to the plant, are not close to the enterprise, but sit right on top? Can you have growth that will benefit South Africa's poor when so much wealth and so much power is concentrated in the hands of the owners of the 5 or 6 biggest conglomerates?
The provision of essential services and providing people with their basic needs has become another crucial area in the restructuring debate. The question of the precise role of the state is central to these arguments.
We're saying that the basic services provided to people must remain in state hands. If you were to privatize water supply, we would just continue the poverty problem, because only those who could afford to pay water would get water, because it's a profit-making enterprise. So this must remain in public hands. We're going to give people water where they haven't got water now, where we're going to give them electricity where they haven't got electricity now, where we're going to give them roads where they haven't got roads now, schools where they haven't got schools. All those basic social services that are really the right of a people, not a privilege, they are a right, should be the function of the state.
Insofar as we are concerned, we would want to see a strong state sector. We would also want to see a strong private sector, you know. And when I speak about a strong state sector, we're not talking about a state that intervenes in all spheres of life. We're talking about a state that intervenes in certain areas where the private sector is either neglecting that area or where it will be able to improve social conditions.
Privatizing things like Eskom, telecom, and such other public utilities, as you might put it, I think that is very unwise, because these public utilities are not just supposed to be there for profit motives. You have other social objectives that you would like to achieve with these private utilities.
I would stress not the level and extent of the state's intervention, but the nature of the state's intervention. I would be arguing that it's absolutely imperative that when the state intervenes in the economy, it does so in a manner which is consistent with markets, not contrary to what markets do or what markets are saying.
We accept the market sends important and vital signals that government must take into account in designing its own economic policy. And secondly, they want to weaken the state because they're going to lose control of the state. We in favor of a strong state because precisely ordinary South Africans will for the first time in the history of our country have control of the state and be able to use it to improve their own lives. Trade unions have learned an important lesson. Our interests are never fully represented by government. We would need to retain our independence. Real independence means a trade union movement that's prepared, if necessary, to take action against the policies of any government. We don't think that in the next year or two, we will get an economy that would satisfy all the needs of workers. So in the short term, we would want an economy that at least has proper policies of growth, that has policies that allows a fair redistribution of wealth to those people who produce the wealth.